Hi everyone, welcome to this video tutorial where we're going to take a look at Bloom's digital taxonomy and see what it is and why it can be so powerful when we explore technology tools and want students to demonstrate their thinking at different levels. So let's begin by looking at this taxonomy. And my name is Dr. Michael Stevenson, and I'm from the Department of Educational Studies at Macquarie University. So to begin with, let's search for the digital Bloom's taxonomy, and you'll see that a range of results come up. So the Bloom's digital taxonomy is used to inform instructors how to use technology and digital tools to facilitate student learning experiences and outcomes. And you'll see there's a range of representations of the taxonomy, particularly graphical representations, and also quite helpful videos for explaining what it is. But we're going to go to a particular publication by a guy called Andrew Churches. And it's this one here that we're particularly interested in. This is you could call it a handbook really, that came out in 2008. And it basically explains the taxonomy as it was coined by Andrew Churches at the time. And it takes you through all the stages and offers some really tangible, practical tools for addressing the different levels of thinking. So to begin with, if we just go through it, and I'm only just going to walk you through it here, you can read it in your own time, and I do highly recommend this as additional reading as part of your reading for this course, and you'll find it's a really easy to read manual for just getting a sense of the taxonomy. Now, it's an update to earlier taxonomies, and that's the most important thing to note. It is actually built on two previous taxonomies. The first one that it's built on is Bloom's taxonomy. Now, Bloom's taxonomy, when you go a little bit into the document, you'll see this was a taxonomy developed in the 1950s by Benjamin Bloom, hence the name. And it was a taxonomy to show the different orders of thinking, or you could say the different levels of thinking. And you can see here when you look at the graphic that we have lower order thinking skills of knowledge, comprehension, application, building towards the higher order thinking skills of analysis, synthesis, and then evaluation. And that was the original taxonomy. Now, what happened in 2001, and you'll probably remember this from looking at Matt Bauer's chapter as part of the required reading for this course, that what happened was that a revised taxonomy was developed by Anderson Krathwohl, and they basically came up with a slightly different version. You'll see they changed the nouns into verbs effectively. So remembering, understanding, applying, analysing, evaluating, and creating. And you'll see if you look at the top two levels, they switched them. So synthesis, as it was referred to by Bloom, was then referred to as creating. And according to Anderson and Krathwohl, creating is the highest order, and then evaluation was positioned at number 5. So you can see there's the revised taxonomy. And then, of course, Andrew Churches in 2008 developed the digital taxonomy, which we're looking at now. And the digital taxonomy really takes the revised taxonomy and looks at what technology tools can be used at each of these stages, starting with remembering and building all the way up to creating. So in this two-part video, we're going to look at the 6 stages or the 6 levels or orders of thinking in this taxonomy, and we're going to look at some recommendations that I have for tools that could be used at each level. So the first video will focus on the first 3 levels. So this one that you're watching now will be remembering, understanding, and applying. And then the subsequent video is going to look at analysing, evaluating, and creating. So let's go down further into the document, and we're going to see one place I like to sort of focus on when I'm introducing this document for the first time is to look at the verbs that Churches has developed, because these verbs are often a very good starting point for thinking about what are students doing at each of the levels. When I develop a task, for example, and I want students to evaluate, let's say, what words would I include in the instructions of that task to ensure that they really are evaluating? So if we look, for example, at remembering at the bottom, we can see that that includes things like recognising, listing, describing, identifying, retrieving. Understanding includes things like interpreting, summarizing, inferring, paraphrasing, and so on. Applying talks about implementing, carrying out, using, executing. Analyzing is comparing, organizing, deconstructing, and so on. Evaluating looks at checking, hypothesizing, critiquing, experimenting, and then, of course, creating looks at things like designing, constructing, planning, producing, and inventing. So, as I say, including words like this in the tasks that we set can be really good for basically prompting the kinds of thinking that we want students to demonstrate. You know, if we really want them to evaluate, we might use words like hypothesize, and judge, and so on. So the verbs are a great place to start. And then, of course, when we get deeper into the taxonomy, we start to look at the different levels. So if we look here at remembering, and I'm on page 6, and we can see that remembering covers those things that we mentioned, the recognizing, the listing, describing, identifying. And then from the taxonomy, from Anderson-Krathwohl's taxonomy, it's looking at recalling, recognizing knowledge from memory. Now, this could be something that you mentioned in a lesson the other day that you want students to be able to remember. It could be a key concept they've studied. It could be a quote from a book that they've read. It could really be a formula that they've learned in mathematics, for example. It could be the findings of an experiment that they conducted or that you conducted. And really, remembering is a really, really important skill. It's right down the bottom, but there's a lot that we can't do if we can't remember. And so what can we do with the digital tools that are available to us to encourage students to remember? And what does that look like? What sort of digital tools do we select? So if we look at this page going further down, you'll see that the first few tools that Churches recommends are tools in quizzes, tests, and flashcards. And you can see one of the tools that he mentions is this one here called Hot Potatoes. There are, of course, others, but Hot Potatoes is a really good one. I'm going to show it to you now. It's been around a long time, and I should mention that this document that we're looking at is now over 10 years old. Some of these tools you will still find, others you won't because they've been replaced by equivalent tools. Hot Potatoes is one that's been around for quite a long time, and it's stood the test of time because it's really, really good. Now, to download it, you simply go to the Hot Potatoes website. So I'm just going to Google in Hot Potatoes download, and you should see it should point me to a University of Victoria in Canada page because the University of Victoria hosts Hot Potatoes now, and you can download it for free. It runs as an application on your computer. It's completely free to download and use. There's no restrictions at all, and it's simply available through the university. So if you click download, you'll see you get a few options for downloading. Now, if you're using a Windows device, as I am, simply choose the 7.0 installer, and that will just install it on your Windows device. If you're using another device, like a Mac OS device or a Linux computer, you can use the Java version, and there's instructions on how to do that. But the Windows install is very simple. Just download it, and then you install it. And then, of course, it will come up, in my case, it's in my Start menu, and you'll be able to open it from there. And so I'm opening the application here, and we're looking at the Hot Potatoes landing page, and you'll see I get a few choices. As I mouse over these choices, it's going to tell me what each of these choices mean. So the first one is the J quiz option, and that's to create a multiple choice quiz. It could be a true-false quiz, or it could just be a quiz with essentially right-wrong answers, words that need to be put in or options that need to be selected. Short answers. Now, this J Cross is fantastic. It happens to be one of the best crossword makers that I've ever encountered in my years of experimenting with educational technology. And it's particularly good because you just simply give it a list of words and a list of corresponding clues or definitions or whatever you want to call them. And then it constructs the crossword for you. So you don't need to sort of map the crossword out. You just give it the data, and then it will create the crossword from there. JMix is superb. This is for creating a jumbled sentence exercise. So it could be a single sentence, it could be multiple sentences, and jumbled up. And it could be things like a procedure that you want students to get into the right order, or a sentence that's just mixed up and the students need to assemble it into a meaningful, correct sentence or sentences. That's J-mix. Now this is J-match, which is probably my favorite of the pick. And this creates some quite sophisticated matching exercises where you can essentially have a left-hand column and a right-hand column. It will jumble up the order, and then you can match the two. So for example, it could be a key concept and then a definition or something like that. The last one in the list here is J close, and as the name suggests, it's a close passage, so it's a fill in the blanks exercise, and you can give hot potatoes a passage of text, and from there you can blank out words, enter in clues and so on, and then the passage is then occurs as a closed passage exercise that the students have to fill in. Now, for all of these, you can either do them as interactive web pages that can be either offline or online, or you can do printouts. So, for example, J Cross has a fantastic ability to print out this crossword, and you can print it out with answers in the back if you want, for example, or just print it out without the answers. But it does all of these can be printed as well as shared through web pages. I'm going to show you how that works. Okay. Now, the last thing to mention is this one here called the masher. And what the masher does is it builds a sequence of exercises into a unit. So this is where you can start to sequence a bunch of different activities into quite a challenging sequence of learning. So to give you an example, let's say we were looking at science, and there was students were learning how to conduct an experiment. We could do all sorts of things there. We could do something like a J-match exercise so that students could look at key scientific terms and their definitions. We could also do something like a crossword where students have to get posed different scientific challenges and get given clues about the solutions to the challenge. We could do something like a close activity where students have to look at a report from an experiment and fill in the blanks. We could do a J-mix exercise where students have to look at an actual experiment in terms of steps that need to be followed, and the steps could be out of order, so the students have to put it into the correct order. You can see simply by doing something like that and sequencing a few activities together, I can assemble a very, very challenging sequence that's going to really ensure that students remember the concepts that they will need to have in order, in this case, to conduct an experiment. So that's really powerful, the masher, once you've done a few of these. Now, what does it look like if I'm going to show you one that I prepared earlier, which is a match exercise. And this match exercise is a very simple one. It's just a quote from a book, or series of quotes from a book, I should say. And against each quote, I've simply put an explanation of the quote, why it's important, why it's significant, what it basically means. And students then will have to match the quote to the meaning. So this is intended for an upper secondary novel study in English literature. And one of the challenges, of course, when students read a book is that they need to remember key quotes because they're going to need to know those when they write essays and so on. So I've just simply done that, and you can see these all match up. Okay, so if we look at this first example, we have the quote, "Why couldn't she have died in Florida?" And the explanation is, this shows the shallow-mindedness of Becca's sisters and their lack of interest in finding out more about Gemma. And it's a moment in the story where two young sisters are basically very shallow-minded in their response to the death of a beloved older member in the family. And this older member has died in another city, and they just find it a bit of a pain that they have to move to another city. And so, of course, the quote shows that they're very callous and rather shallow-minded in their response to that. And you can get the idea. And then we have obviously a series of other quotes with explanations. So what this looks like is an interactive thing. And remember, you can do the interactive web page, or you can hit the print button when you go to print, and it will print it for you. But I'm just going to do the web page option here. This one here does a drag and drop web page. So I'm going to click that, and it will prompt me to come up with an HTML file, which is simply a web page file. I'm going to put it on the desktop. And just a reminder, you do not need an internet connection. I'm not using an internet connection for this. I've simply created a web page, but it can be opened on any browser And straight away I have this matching exercise. And so we have a series of quotes that need to be basically matched up to, oops, I'll just go back and we'll reload that. And we have a series of quotes that need to be matched up to their meanings. And so if we look at, for example, this one, and we drop it in next to this one, and over here, and I'm just going to put in a few answers and we'll see how we do. And I'll find that quote, "Why couldn't she have died in Florida?" which should go with this first one up here. And then I can just say, check, and I've got 15%. It's also highlighted the one that's not correct, so I've got 2 that are correct, and this one over here is not, so I can pop that back. And you get the idea, and of course I can go through until I've done all the matchings until it's 100% right. And of course this just runs on my desktop, so you can share these files offline. You can also put them online. So if you've got a learning management system such as Moodle, you can add the files into Moodle, and Moodle will even grade the students. It will record down the grade that they get from doing these exercises. So it's fantastic in that it can integrate very nicely with many learning management systems. So this is the idea with hot potatoes, and you can see here it's a fantastic way just to develop simple but very sophisticated and can be quite challenging activities for students to do to demonstrate their ability to remember. So let's now move to the understanding stage of the taxonomy. And we can see here, and I happen to be on page 11 of the document, understanding focuses on things like interpreting, summarising, inferring, paraphrasing, and so on, or constructing meaning from different types of function, be they written or graphic. Now, one of the things that Andrew Churches recommends for this stage of the taxonomy is advanced and Boolean searching. And this is something that we may not do all the time. In fact, most of us may well just be relying on very basic Google searches and not really exploring deeper level searches. Of course, there are a lot of search engines, but Google happens to be one of the ones that is quite good to use when we are simply trying to do an advanced search, because since Google's development as a tool, it's always had an advanced search option. Now, to access Google's advanced search page, it's just google.com/advanced_search. And you'll see it comes up with a page that says advanced search, and it will prompt you with some of the things that you can do in an advanced search. You don't have to do all of these things, but you can use some of these prompts to find specific things that you want. So, for example, I might say that I want results that have the word blooms in them, plus the exact phrase digital taxonomy. And I could say any of these words, remembering or understanding. Okay, so you can see any of those words that feature. I could even put in additional ones. So, for example, creating. Okay, the good thing about these is by putting these in, these will be highlighted in the result. If you were wanting to screen out specific results, so let's say you've done a search before and you seem to be getting all these irrelevant search results that have other words in them. What you could do is to screen them out. So let's say I was doing a search for Bloom's taxonomy, and I keep getting results for flowers. I could actually screen that out by putting a minus and then flowers in. I could also do a number range. It's not really relevant in this case, but if I wanted to do a particular range based on numbers, I can search for any language or any region. So if I wanted just results from the Philippines or just results from Australia, for example, I can search results from specific times. And I can also search results from domains. And I'm actually going to put in edu here for the domain. I can search for terms that appear anywhere on the page. And I can also search for results that will point me to specific files. So, for example, if I wanted PDF results, I could search for PDFs. And so to do this search, I'm just going to hit advanced search. And I'm now getting quite focused and specific results. You can see all the results miss the word flowers, so I'm not going to get any results that have flowers in them. they're all from edu websites like universities and what have you. They all have the word blooms in them, and digital taxonomy as well. So they'll all have that exact phrase, digital taxonomy, and they'll all have optionally either remembering, understanding, or creating, and you can see those words are highlighted there. So this is really amazing, and as I say, all the results are PDFs, so I'm going to get straight to PDFs here. So this gives you quite specific results. Now, can I also point out here that basically, when you get the search, it will show you what the search was just by typing it into the Google bar here. So you can see here I've got blooms, and then I've got remembering or understanding or creating. I've got digital taxonomy in inverted commas. I've got minus flowers so that there are no flowers. I've got site:/edu, and I've got file type:/PDF. Now, the great thing about this is once you get familiar with this, so for example, if you get familiar with the fact that you can put in file type : or site:, you can actually do an advanced search straight from the Google bar. Okay, so to demonstrate that, for example, if I just go now to google.com and I type in blooms, and then I type in file type PDF and site edu, and if I type in digital taxonomy, and then I type in remembering or understanding, that's actually doing an advanced search. And just by knowing those extra little settings that I can put into the search, I'm going to get the same results. You can see it's very similar results here based on what I just typed in. So this is amazing. Once you start learning how to do advanced searches just from using that advanced search page, you can then broaden that into just doing regular searches but using the advanced options within the regular search. And so therefore we're teaching students how to become much more discerning in what they look at, to better understand what they find, and to have a stake in really trying to find good quality information. So the last stage of the taxonomy that we're going to look at for this particular tutorial comes down to the applying stage. And I'm going to scroll down because you can see there's lots of examples here on the understanding stage. And then, of course, we get to applying over here, and I'm on page number 19 at this point. And applying has to do with key terms like carrying out, using, executing, implementing, showing, or exhibiting. So things like carrying out or using a procedure through executing or implementing. And you can see when we get deeper into this, we see things like the importance of working with illustrations or running things like simulations, graphical tools, manipulating things like 3D objects in Google SketchUp, and just getting in and applying some skills that we have. Now, I'm going to show you an example that's a bit newer than the taxonomy that we're looking at here. It's only come out in the last couple of years, but it happens to be a fantastic one at the application stage. And it's a website called gapminder.org. That's just gapminder.org. Now, this is a website that was started fairly recently to basically help people to understand and work with global facts. And it actually interfaces with a whole lot of data that's been aggregated and then drawn on to produce some really interesting ways of representing that data. And it allows people, the users of the website, to experiment with different representations and different data sources at different times. So there's a lot to the website, and they give you things like teaching resources. They have little featured things, like at the moment they've got this thing called Dollar Street, which shows you different representations of people and how they live based on different monthly incomes, and shows you how they sort of all sorts of aspects about their lives based on photos and things and data that was taken. They also have other things like this tool, which is really powerful for working with even just a simple X-axis and Y-axis, and basically experimenting with different variables. Now, you'll see when you click that tool, which is just accessible by clicking Tools at the top of the homepage, they give you an example, and they've actually thrown up an example onto the screen just to get you started. This one has income on the x-axis, and then it has life expectancy on the y. Now, if you look at this, it's actually got bubbles based on the size of the country, and it's positioned all the countries of the world on these axes. So we can see what kind of correlations exist between income and life expectancy. Now, if we were to go to some of these outliers, for example, here, Central African Republic, which has very low annual GDP sort of income and very low life expectancy. And if we go to see some examples over here, we can see Singapore is obviously very high life expectancy and relatively very high income. And so you can see here that there are some strong correlations between income and life expectancy. And then we can also see that there are some people in the middle that do okay, in terms of income, but still quite good in terms of life expectancy. So Nicaragua, for example, has quite high life expectancy for not that high income. And so there's sort of rules, and then there's exceptions to the rules as well. Now, as far as this goes, this is a good starting point, but you'll see each of these axes gives you a little drop-down menu, and then you can actually change the variable. Now, I should say on this website there are so many variables that you can play with, almost too many to possibly mention in this case. But I can certainly mention that they're grouped into certain categories. So, for example, if I click on education, we can see there's variables on literacy, and I could look at literacy rates for adults, for example, or literacy rates for females, which will be a percentage, of course, of the whole. And so I could look at literacy rate by income in this case. So if I go to female literacy as my variable, we'll see here that there is a bit of a correlation between income and female literacy. So if we look here and we go Eritrea, for example, has a literacy rate, female literacy rate of 59% with a fairly low income. We'll see down here, of course, we have Afghanistan, with an appallingly low female literacy rate and also a relatively low income. And then, of course, as we go further up on the income scale, we go quite high on female literacy. So we have obviously Saudi Arabia with 82% and a much higher income. And then if we go up to the very top here, we can see there are certainly exceptions here, 99% in Turkmenistan, which is obviously very, very high, which is great, for not that high of an income. So we can sort of see there's a bit of a correlation, but at the same time, there are countries that are doing relatively well, even with relatively small income, and still managing to have a very high female literacy rate. And then, of course, we have the ones down here that are, incredibly low, and that there is a correlation there between very low income and very low literacy, which would suggest that abject poverty does have an impact on female literacy. But you can see here, this is just amazing at what I can do. So I can change that literacy rate to, for example, babies per woman, and see, well, what's that going to tell me? And then I get another representation here showing me a negative correlation in that the higher the income, the lower the number of babies per woman. And that's, of course, to be expected, as we know from looking at similar data. So Niger, for example, 7.4 babies born per woman, with a very, very low income of, in that case, $802. And that's annually. So you can see here, and then, of course, do we go down here? And we can see Singapore with, again, a very high income and very low birth rate there. So again, we're seeing correlations, we're seeing expectations, and we're seeing, to some degree, exceptions based on the rules that we observe. So you can see Gapminder is just a fantastic one for looking at different trends. You can see there's other ways to represent the data, and it's other suggestions for possible approaches. You can see they're asking some really good questions like, how did babies per woman change in the world? and you can see that over time. How did the world population change? How does income relate to life expectancy? So you can see there's some big questions that we can explore by using different variables on this website. And this is really hands-on learning, really practical stuff. So I hope you found these examples helpful for seeing how we can get students to think at different levels. Of course, there are many more technology examples, and we're going to see some more in the next video, but hopefully these ones are good starting points, and you can explore similar tools that that will be beneficial for you and useful in some way through your own technology exploration.